Καλησπέρα σας. Αξιότιμοι καλεσμένοι, κυρίες και κύριοι που βρίσκεστε εδώ στο Άλβα, αλλά και όσοι μας παρακολουθείτε διαδικτυακά μέσω του live streaming, καλώς ήρθατε στην πρώτη για τη φετινή περίοδο συζήτηση του Κέντρου Αριστείας του ΣΕΒ στη Δημιουργική Ηγεσία, με τίτλο «Οι τέχνες και η τέχνη της ηγεσίας», μια συζήτηση με την Carol Becker, καθηγήτρια και επίτιμη πρίτανη της Σχολής Τεχνών του Πανεπιστημίου Κολούμπια. Ευχαριστούμε θερμά την καθηγήτρια Becker. Η παρουσία της μας τιμά ιδιαίτερα και ανυπομονούμε να την ακούσουμε. Ευχαριστούμε και εσάς που μας παρακολουθείτε. Προσβλέπουμε στη δική σας συμμετοχή. Μπορείτε όπως πάντοτε να μας στέλνετε τα σχόλια και τις ερωτήσεις σας καθ' όλη τη διάρκεια της εκδήλωσης, όσοι μας παρακολουθείτε online, κάνοντας χρήση του chatbox που βλέπετε στην οθόνη σας. Η συζήτηση θα διεξαχθεί στην αγγλική γλώσσα. Υπάρχει δυνατότητα διερμηνίας για εσάς που βρίσκεστε εδώ. Διαλέγετε το αντίστοιχο κανάλι. Οπότε θα ξεκινήσω και εγώ τώρα να μιλάω στα αγγλικά. I would like to extend a warm welcome to those of you being here. Today's discussion has the title, The Arts and the Art of Leadership, a conversation with Carol Becker, Professor and Dean Emerita of Columbia University School of the Arts. Thank you, Professor Becker, for honoring us with your presence. We're really looking forward to have you share with us your expertise and your innovative approach on the subject. Also, thank you to our audience. You can participate in today's discussion, and we are waiting for your comments or your questions. Those of you watching us online, you can post those on the chat box that you can find on the right side of your screen. Without further ado, I would like to ask Mrs. Deree Konomou, Director of Human Capital Affairs at SEV, to take the floor for an opening remark.
Thank you. Can you hear me clearly? Because I have a really loud voice, so sorry about that. Kalispera. Thank you all for being here. On behalf of SEV, I would like to welcome you all. It is our great pleasure to host this event for another year. SEV Center of Excellence in Creative Leadership was founded 5 years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not, I hope. And our aim is to highlight the importance of innovation and creative leadership for business competitiveness, as well as transfer pioneering knowledge to thousands of business executives. Yet SEV Center of Excellence for Creative Leadership is one of the pillars that SEV and ALBA are standing together for learning. Our common goal is to establish and consolidate learning as the main path towards the modernization and flourishing of Greek entrepreneurship. The transformation of the Greek economy needs huge investment on human capital and of course needs creative leadership and inspirational leadership as well. To date, the SEV and ALBA Learning Alliance has helped 1,500 executives in more than 120 companies to upgrade their managerial knowledge and skills through the seminars organized every year. Through our scholarship program, we have given the opportunity to dozens of business executives to study in one of the prestigious postgraduate degrees and programs that are offered by ALBA Graduate Business School. And we have contributed dynamically to the development and dissemination of modern leadership models through SEV Center of Excellence in Creative Leadership. Dear all, we need new narratives to bring people together to achieve a more inclusive and sustainable world. Art is one of them. More and more universities are bringing the arts into MBAs to promote the creativity of future business leaders. Leadership is an actual art and not metaphorically. Leaders, just like artists, may inspire, motivate, challenge, promote self-expression and out-of-the-box thinking, arouse creative energy, and can eventually change our lives. Leadership and art bring in the surface emotions, and leadership is an art form that requires creativity, vision, and expression, a capable artist, and worthy canvas to project the vision. Everything starts with a vision, either you are an artist or a leader. Carol definitely has a vision, and thank you very much for being here. I was impressed by her CV, an accomplished author, scholar, arts educator, contributor to leading art magazines, traveler, a member of the Global Agenda Council on the Role of Art in Society for the World Economic Forum, but I was impressed the most, having read that she also collaborated with the Renzo Piano Building Workshop to develop the vision of the Columbia School's venue building, resulting in a forward-looking site for the arts that houses lecture, symposia, readings, film screenings, exhibitions, and theatrical productions. Thank you for being here today. I hope that you will all enjoy this thought-provoking discussion, as Nikos mentioned earlier, about the arts and the art of leadership.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ikonomou. I would now like to ask Dr. Konstantinos Axarloglu, Dean and Professor of International Business and Strategy at Alba Graduate Business School, the American College of Greece, for his opening remark.
Good evening and welcome all to our series of the SEV Center of Creative Leadership, and welcome the speaker. It's a great honor, Carol, to be with us. Few thoughts. I'm a baby boomer. I know it does not show, but I'm a baby boomer. At the end of it, why I mention it? Because baby boomers, we grew up in a world where things were evolving in a sort of linear way, so that we had enough time to adjust and learn and continue our lives. Fortunately or unfortunately, the last 10 years perhaps, we don't live in such a world. We live in a disruptive world. Some people call it VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that's a major shift in the paradigm of the world in which we live. Now, in a stable world where I grew up, what was important was repetition. Economists call that mass production, economies of scale. We learn to do something and we repeat it. So what is very important is tremendous specialization, so we gain efficiency out of it. In a VUCA world, this is not the name of the game. In a VUCA world, we see things that we haven't seen before, and the next thing we will see tomorrow, it's another thing that we haven't seen before. So the way to move forward is another mindset. Now people talk about the Renaissance person. That's the name of the game for all of us, which means specialization, of course, but also comprehension of other things. Today I'm here personally with the expectation that Carol is going to be able to give us a glimpse of this kind of Renaissance person, which is the person that we all need to aspire to. It's a T-type of person with specialization and comprehension of the arts in that way. So we have a pleasure to have Carol with us. It's a great honor. And I'm sure that by the end of the day today, all of us will be much wiser from what we will hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa. Thank you, Dora. It is a delight to welcome you all to this first event in this academic year. Those of you who are in this room at Alba and those of us who are watching online. So since we are launching this academic year's series of discussion series of the Center of Excellence, it's a good opportunity to reflect a little bit on the efforts that we've been making at Alba for more than 10 years now to bring the arts into the curricula and the activities that we do with our students. So those of you who studied at Alba remember that you perhaps did a course on theater. If you haven't studied at Alba, then yes, we do teach theater in the MBA, the executive MBA. We teach creativity to our students. And in fact, in that spirit, it was Babis Meremelis who founded the Center of Excellence 5 years ago as a focal point, bringing together creativity and leadership. So it is very timely, very opposite, that, and we're very fortunate to have with us Carol Becker today. Now, perhaps we don't have to remind ourselves, but perhaps we do. Why on earth do we need to converse between business and the arts? And as Dora said, leaders need to inspire creativity. Leaders need to produce a vision and perhaps an unknowable vision of the future, and then motivate people to carry them forward. Companies, our companies, they need to be creative. They want to be innovative. They talk about and try to embrace failure as a stepping stone to learning and improving. And also in recent years, companies want to align their economic objectives, their financial objectives, with broader social and environmental goals and problems, right? Now, and if we take a step back, then we realize that artists do the same. They engage in a creative process, they sense their environment, and they try to respond to actual needs or the future direction or the problems in that environment. So it's a very simple question. The world of business doesn't regularly talk business with artists, but should we, and can we learn more from that conversation? And this is why we are here today, and we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to have that conversation with Carol and Georgia. Now, Carol, as you already know, and she has been introduced already, is a professor of the arts and a public intellectual who has served as dean at Columbia and at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Through her work as a dean, she has had a lasting impact on art education. Through her work as a scholar and as a public intellectual, she has always endeavored to find connections between the realm of the arts and so many other fields within education, politics, society, gender, and many others. And it's indicative, if you have a look at the titles of her books, it's indicative of the breadth, they are indicative of the breadth of their perspective. The Invisible Drama, Women and the Anxiety of Change, Surpassing the Spectacle, Global Transformations and the Changing Politics of Art, The Subversive Imagination, Arts, Society, and Social Responsibility are just some of her books. Carol holds a PhD in English and American Literature from the University of California, San Diego, and she has also worked closely with the World Economic Forum to build the Artist and Culture program. Now, Carol would not be here with us today if it wasn't for my colleague, and I should say friend, Georgia Kotretsos, who was a student of Carol at Chicago for her master's in fine arts. Georgia earned her bachelor's degree at the Durban Institute of Technology in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. She's a visual artist, researcher, and publisher, and she has presented her work in places such as New York, St. Louis, Basel, Mulhouse in Alsace, and of course in Greece and many other parts of the world. She's the founder and artistic director of the nonprofit organization, the ΤΕΛΟΣ SOCIETY, Arts and Culture Research Lab Observatorium. And among the things that I find exciting in her work is projects in which she travels to remote and small and perhaps even forgotten places all over Greece to study the local history and culture and engage with the people there. She teaches at the Francis Rich School of Fine and Performing Arts at the American College of Greece. And so with that introduction, please welcome Carol Becker and Georgia Kotretsos.
Can I say something first? So I'm working on my Greek, so I will give you my opening sentence. Σας ευχαριστώ που βρίσκομαι εδώ μαζί σας σήμερα.
Thank you very much for being with you.
Tell us more about how you came to learn Greek and what is your connection with the country.
Learn Greek, that's a huge exaggeration. I'm working on Greek. You want me to talk about Greece?
About your relationship with Greece. I know you've been here a few times.
Many times. So I see Artemis right here in the front row, Artemis Zenitou, and I will say something about that too, and my life with Fulbright. But first I came to Greece, I was 19 years old, and it was, like I think you all have probably had an experience where you go somewhere and you just think, this is home. Like, how come I wasn't born Greek? I mean, that was my first thought. I don't understand that. I'm Polish and Russian, Jewish and Catholic, but I felt immediately at home in Greece, and it has always been the case. And then I was very poor. I was in school for a lot of years after that trip, and I could never come back. And then I applied for a Fulbright. And the first time I applied for a Fulbright, they wanted me to go to Poland because they couldn't take any more Fulbrights to Greece. And they said, oh, you're going to love Poland. They've lifted the rationing of meat. I said, no, I'm waiting to go to Greece. And then I applied again, and then I got to go to Corfu and teach at the Ionian University in Corfu, which was the most, well, you can imagine, wonderful experience. And I'm still close to the students that I taught there, who I was in the School of Translation, and they translated my first book. My anxiety book also exists in Greek, thanks to my students. So it's a long relationship, it continues. I've come back every year since Corfu, except for COVID years. Georgia knows it well. See her every time.
I guess, Georgia, you have to work harder on her Greek language skills.
Yeah, we're going to work. We're going to work. We're working.
Yeah, we had a couple of lessons back in the States, but then they ended up becoming conversations rather than lessons. So.
Okay, fantastic. Now, since we are on a personal note, you have studied English and American literature, right? Which means you haven't studied art or curation. So tell us a little bit about your journey from literature to the arts.
Well, literature too is an art. So all those years of studying literature were not wasted on me when I became a dean of an art school. But after I finished in the university, I really was done, I thought, with an academic life. I felt that and it was something we'll talk about more, it felt very restricted to me, this discipline of 19th century American literature that I was then going to be teaching and doing that for the rest of my life. And I was very young when I got my PhD, so I left and became a journalist. After a time of being a journalist, not very long, I realized it was never going to be a great journalist because you had to be so fast and you had to condense so much, and that also I'd stop reading books. I found, and I was reading newspapers and magazines, but this deep part of me that's very intellectual was not satisfied. So I started teaching again, and I ended up teaching at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where Georgia went to school and where I met her. And I just fell in love with the production of an art school. I just felt like this is so interesting. Like, here are people, it's like a factory. People are working in multiple forms all the time. Not everyone is writing, which is what would happen to me in the academic world. Everyone would have been doing what I do. But everyone was crossing disciplines, particularly in the early 80s and 90s. Like, everyone was just working across discipline and form. And I really started to feel that this environment was so interesting to me because it was an environment really about ideas manifesting in multiple forms and in different forms. And I really fell in love also with the materiality of it and the production of it. So I had no reason to ever think I was part-time faculty. I had no reason to ever think I'd end up running an art school, becoming the dean of an art school, vice president, even acting president, But it was incredibly pedagogical because the Art Institute also has a museum. So the relationship between the production of art and the cultivation, curation, historization of art, I learned everything about that there, which everything about that is what prepared me to enter into the Research University of Columbia and do the same. But everyone said, when I was acting dean, I was associate dean, I was all these things, you'll never be the dean because they've never had in 40 years, there'd never been anyone who was the dean of the Art Institute of Chicago who wasn't an artist, and I was a writer. I said, and also there's never been anyone who wasn't a woman, I noted. And they said, oh no, that's not an issue. I said, well, it probably was some kind of issue because it's been 130 years, so probably something to do. And that was the same at Columbia. I was the first woman dean of an art school at Columbia. But it never was something I aspired to, and yet all my academic training in terms of thinking and learning about literature and understanding a symbolic world, everything was very useful to just immersing myself in an art school. And I seemed to be able to cross boundaries and talk to everybody, so it worked. I became a dean.
All right, so tell us more about that. What is, when you transition from being a faculty member to being a dean, everything changes, your relationship with everybody changes.
Yes, oh yes.
And suddenly you have a different agenda in front of you. So want to tell us a little bit about what it has been like for you as a leader of a large and historic institution of that sort?
Well, the first thing that happened in Chicago, I was on the faculty senate before I became the dean. And I went then to a faculty senate meeting. They said, oh no, you're not faculty anymore. I said, whoa, what, really? It hadn't occurred to me because in my life, my aspiration had always been to be a faculty member, to be a professor. And all of a sudden they were telling me I wasn't that anymore. And I realized, okay, I get it. I'm running this now. And I'm running it hopefully in a very collaborative way. And the second thing that happened was there had been certain kind of artists running the school. And I say this with deep affection, but there was a lot of machismo in art schools. And they were run by sculptors and men who had a certain style of leadership, which is very different than I already can see here and that I have already encountered. But that moment in time, so I immediately changed the structure and made a very horizontal structure of communication with everybody. And what that did was people said, oh, she doesn't know how to do the job. She's not running everything out of her back pocket. She's actually asking us. She must not know what she's doing. But over time, the school went from being not even on the US News and World Report list of the top 10 art schools to being the #1 art school. So the chairman of our board gave me the challenge. He said, it was Marshall Field, who probably don't know Chicago, but that's a very big department store, the Field Museum, that a very, very wealthy family. He said, I will give the school a big gift if you can make us #1. And so we did, but it was we who did it. And so I shifted the culture of how people understood the leadership of an art school. And then when I came to Columbia, I had to do the same. So I can talk more, but we can.
Make it sound easy.
No. It was so not easy. I mean, Jack's here, my husband, he knows it was so not easy in Chicago because first of all, everyone, except for my very, very closest friends, basically stopped talking to me because now I was the dean. I don't know, I hope this doesn't happen to you. But people stopped talking to me. And also, all I was interested in was making the school better and trying to analyze what wasn't working well. And how could we raise more money for the school? And how could we make the school work more efficiently? Art schools are very intensive. They're expensive. They need production facility. They need equipment. They need new technology. How do you make that important? How do you make that work, especially in a culture where the museum was what everyone most loved? Like everyone was giving all the resource to the museum. Now the School of the Art Institute school budget is larger than the museum budget. And the School of the Art Institute is actually the driving economic force of that entity called the Corporation of the Art Institute of Chicago. That took a big turnaround. But just because I'm in a business school environment, I'll just say something that I probably wouldn't talk about normally, but I'll say it's a very simple idea. The production of art is very expensive. You need in space intensity, you have a very small ratio of faculty to students. So what we thought, okay, what I'd really like, what I really think is the environment that creative people need is an environment which talks about all disciplines. So we started writing, which art schools had not done, now they all do it. We started arts administration, which art schools traditionally had not done. They would usually run out of business schools. We started art therapy, art education already existed. We did visual and critical studies. All of these disciplines are the intellectual theorizing and production of ideas, but they're not physically making things, which meant that they could actually bring in revenue for the school that we couldn't generate with the very expensive production of art. So we created a different model for what an art school could be, and that intellectually is the best model because you want the art historians and the curators, and you want the writers, you want everybody together. Because when people like Georgia leave school, visual artists, you want people to write about the work, you want people to curate the work, you want students to have met, and that's true at Columbia as well. You want people to have met those people that are going to help launch them into the world. So if you create an environment where everyone talks to each other, then you're really cooking. And we were able to do that, but we were able to generate revenue by doing that and pay for the very expensive production of art. So.
Okay, so now I want to turn to Georgia. And Georgia, tell us about the significance of the work that Carol did at Chicago and the impact of that transformation.
I'll speak about the school. It was #1 when I was there, and that's tough because afterwards everything else you cannot compare anything else to the school. The environment was so engaging. We had all the resources that we ever needed. We were bombarded with information, more than we could handle. So then you had to manage your time and the resources and everything you had at your disposal very well. And it was like running a race, but a very healthy race. I was prepared for the world afterwards. I never expected somebody to offer me a job or to offer me an opportunity. I knew that I had to create on my own, and I've been doing ever since. And that is quite liberating, that you know that you're equipped with the tools that you can create opportunities for yourself, that you have a vision and then you know how to move forward. Sometimes we do get stuck, and it's part of the process, but it's fine.
How about the impact in the art education world?
Well, we all feel the same, and that's why we have still the network, a very healthy network across the globe that Carol has created. Otherwise, we would never have met. We're still working together and have daily conversations from India to Brazil to Ireland. We're still in contact. That is impactful, where my network is still healthy and productive and it works. And we have helped each other progress and move forward. And that creates a community that it's not necessary in a cluster found and located in the same place. So that is very impactful for any artist's practice.
Can I say something? It's not the environment that I created, it's the environment that the team created, truly. And that's really an important way I think about it. It's not me, it's just someone sets it in motion, and then you know this, those of you in business, you bring in the right team of people and you let them go. And you listen to their ideas, then you got something in motion. So I don't want it to sound like it was me. It was just me as catalyst.
Yes, I don't want to personalize it in that way, but I want to get to the kind of development that you had to go through, or a process maybe to win over the trust of the people that you said had learned to work in a certain way and to understand their institutional environment a certain way, and then you had to change their minds, basically. And so, this is the heart of leadership in any organization.
Yeah. So this is also the same problem existed at Columbia. Before I came to Columbia, they had deposed 2 of the former deans. So when I came, I was there a month, and they were trying to depose me. And so I called we say the faculty, a few people.
A few people.
Okay, right. But those are the hard ones, you know. So those few people, I called in the person I thought was sort of at the head of all that. And I said, okay, so you're trying to depose me. I've just arrived. So exactly why are you doing that? And do you think that Columbia University is going to care about a School of the Arts who deposes yet another dean for no reason? What do you think my agenda is? And he had said nothing. I said, I have one agenda, and that's just to make this school better. That's all I want to do. So the first thing was just to, over time, show that there was no other agenda, and there was no other agenda. I mean, the challenge to me was huge enough. At Columbia, the challenge was complicated because when you have a research university like Columbia, where you have 16 professional schools, you have medical school, law school, business school, you name it, they have everything. And then you're an art school. So you're small, you're like architecture, art, social work, usually the service schools, public health, and then there's the rich schools. And you're trying to negotiate your place in that my goal at Columbia was, can I make the School of the Arts important to Columbia? And that's like saying, can you make the School of the Arts important to the world? Because everybody's there. Everybody in all those disciplines is there. And that was an even bigger challenge than the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And it took the same thing of winning over the faculty who just simply had to see that all the agenda was to improve this, and also to convince them that artists are very rebellious in the sense that they would like to be left alone, basically, to run their own school. But you can't do that when you live in a universe like Columbia, to be part of it. And so how to become part of it, that's what the school had never achieved. And now I think we are truly, School of the Arts it's a gem, like a jewel in the crown. And I think when I came, people didn't even know there was an art school. When I remember going to human resources, figure out my check stuff when I first came to Columbia, and they said, "Oh, Dean of the School of the Arts." Oh, I didn't know we had a School of the Arts. I said, "Oh, well, I'm Dean of it." But my first thing I did, which was something so simple, but I'll show you how it worked. We had no money to do anything. But I thought, well, we can send out these e-blasts, because what we had was famous people in writing, in visual art, theater, and film, 4 disciplines, really successful faculty and students. So I have to make that visible. So every day I would think of, well, who just won what award, and I would send out these little blasts to everybody. Oh, you should be very proud. School of the Arts at Columbia just won, the Booker Prize, or School of the Arts just won the Academy Award. And I didn't know, and this is going out into the vacuum of email. And then one day I was calling about something for myself, and the woman on the other end said, "Oh, I just got your e-blast, which said of all the people in the Academy Awards, all the people from Columbia who are connected to the Academy Awards. And so tomorrow night, I'm going to sit with my list, and I'm going to check them off as I watch the Academy Awards." I thought, bingo, it worked. It worked. People are listening. And that was the beginning. Very simple thing that just began, oh, I didn't know so-and-so was teaching. Oh, I didn't know so-and-so graduate. It was so simple, but it had to be sort of in people's face, because Columbia is so big and the successes are so enormous in neuroscience and everything, and here we are, this little art school. And then everyone started wanting to work with us because we were successful and cool.
All right, can you generalize then on the qualities of leadership, especially in a creative environment? Because increasingly in business as well, we want to, if we aren't a creative environment, we want to become one.
Okay, well, I'll say something, and then I want Georgia to say if she thinks this is true about art schools. I always think of the philosopher, psychoanalyst, Winnicott, who talks about a holding environment, talks about a safe place for the child, for the evolution of the child. And I always like that idea that you create a holding environment, a place where people feel that they can try things, and a place where they feel safe to fail, a place where they feel safe to have their own opinion. So creating an atmosphere which has just enough structure so that it can fit in Columbia within that bigger structure. So we're not like all over. So we have to fit within guidelines and rules. And we talked about this a little earlier, but yet within that there was a lot of fluidity and a lot of room, and that the faculty were very empowered to execute that room, and the students were empowered to enjoy that room. And until someone crossed a line that was unacceptable and then had to be reeled back. So that's basically how I think about art schools. And our job in the dean's office of everyone was to keep it running in such a way that it wasn't intruding on that pedagogical motivation for the school. So it's a simple thing. It's just, how do you create the tone? And one way is to not politicize the office of the dean, or not politicize everyone who works in that suite of people, so that people didn't feel that things were being plotted, things were happening they didn't know about, that people were, there was a kind of transparency, but a kind of just open-heartedness, I guess I would call it, that just said, this is what we're doing. We're trying to make this place work. Don't screw it up. Don't get in trouble, because that makes it harder for all of us to do our job. And over time, people begin to trust that, and that trust is what allows that creative environment. So I don't know,
Yeah, early on we had a discussion about structures within the art school, and I thought they're necessary. At the beginning, when I was there, I was also equally frustrated with some of the restrictions that you might have had for projects that you wanted to create. But now I realize,
Now that you're teaching.
not only practicing also, I realize that every project has a different structure that I have to work with. So I have to learn a new language, new people. Every project, every single thing that we're doing changes. So once you train yourself that you can adapt to this structure, then you can bounce off it ideas, find little loopholes where you can create liberties. That's beautiful games. And if you just introduce freedom and liberties to any creative environment or artist, you're going to end up with, you're going to discover that we might have a hard time managing liberties and our time. So I think the structure is there to kind of cocoon.
So how did you
Division.
experience that holding space that Carol just mentioned?
The holding space within the institution?
Yes.
Yeah, when you were at the
Was
school.
it evident to you?
Yeah, obviously, because for every single thing that we wanted to realize, we had to have some sort of permission. It had to be okayed by someone, by some sort of authority within the school. And that was part of the process. I mean, now you go to a museum, there is another process. So the same language is applied in different environments. So once you learn it, then you become a better professional in your field. Not that I feel like a professional as an artist. I feel like being an artist. But it's part of the game that you have to play in order to get things done. And sometimes you can be extremely creative with language or how you propose things. We learn very fast that we're going to have to invent a new kind of language in order to elbow our way through things that the school didn't allow us perhaps to do. And that's perfect.
Did you find the dean supportive in that?
Absolutely. Sometimes they weren't even aware of what we were doing. But I think
Just as well.
you learn to invent this new language to pitch for something that is not permitted. And that's
So that's interesting because that's the other side of it, which is, you know, like when you're running an art school, you're trying to keep it on like a boat. You're trying to keep it going steady, but the students are pulling this way and they're pulling that way, and you keep trying to get it back on track. I used to describe my job at Chicago like someone would call and I'd say, "Oh no, they did what? Oh, you're kidding." Like, really? And it would be like, that was my job. It was like these weird things that I could never have anticipated. But I always felt that the rules shouldn't be arbitrary. Like, there were some outrageous things that happened there, but those things couldn't happen. Once we found out, they couldn't happen again because they were truly dangerous. But what you're saying is the other side of it, which is once you learn to work within institutional structures, that is helpful.
Very.
Because you're always going to be out in the world and someone is going to either give you permission or not. And you can't do just anything you want to do in a museum context or in a collector context or in an outdoor context or anything. So it's this push and pull environment, but never to sacrifice possibility. Like always to try to say, okay, can we make this work? Until you can't. And if people begin to see that you're always trying to do that, you're always on the side of the creative person, but sometimes you just have to say no.
So let me challenge you a little bit. Elsewhere, you talk about the subversive potential of art in society. Perhaps you can elaborate on this a little bit, but then would that apply within Columbia, for example? Would you expect Georgia, with her work, to be subversive?
So subversive is an interesting word, which I did choose in my book. What that means, you want to shift. I think that the School of the Arts, I'll just say it this way, is subversive within the institution of Columbia because we push on the boundaries all the time of what's possible. And so I did this initiative at Columbia called Year of Water. And we came back, Jack and I, from Michigan a few summers ago, obsessed because we have a very good friend who's an environmental lawyer about the problem of water, which is probably going to be, or is, one of the great problems of the world, apart from what's happening right now in the Middle East, which is an enormous problem. But water is huge. So I came back obsessed with water, and I thought, everything we do this year in terms of public programming is going to be in that theme. But I also knew that at Columbia, there are many, many experts on water. So how's the School of the Arts going to lead that? So I invited all my fellow deans. They all came. And I invited the 3 water institutes at Columbia, none of whom had, by the way, ever met until I invited them to my office. So imagine that. And I said, this is what we're going to do. Everything the School of the Arts is going to do this year is going to focus on the issue of water. We would like all of you to be part of that. And we're going to have a website. The head of communications at Columbia loved it. So she said, we will build you a website. I said, you can all upload whatever you want to do. I didn't tell anybody what they should do. And because we're the School of the Arts, we're so not threatening. We weren't the business school, sorry. But the business school is such a powerful thing at Columbia. And if we have a wonderful dean, by the way, a Greek dean, Kostis Magladis, who's fabulous, you should invite him. But if they were pushing something, everybody would probably not. But the School of the Arts, why not? Sure, we'll be part of it. This will be fun. And I said, you do whatever you want. We'll upload it all. And so we had 32 partners for the Year of Water, and we did a whole year. We even extended it to the next year of events and issues in all different disciplines. But we could be the catalysts. The art could be the catalyst because we are open to everything. Because truthfully, I don't know if Georgia will agree on this, art doesn't necessarily have content. Art has form into which you can put any content. So art can be about anything. It can be a play about the issue of water, or it can be a play about the issue of the family, or it can be a film about anything. So art is form, and ideas flow through that form. So to use it that way, to be the place where things can flow through the School of the Arts, I wanted to make the School of the Arts important because we could do that. And we did huge public programs, which I could talk about at great length, and brought 10,000 people to the new campus for a light installation of water, of projected light that looks like water, that was the height of the water if it had risen in the Hudson, and 10,000 people came to the new campus. No other school at Columbia could have done that because they couldn't have thought of something so daring. I had to get the money to do it for the president's office, I have to admit. This was a very expensive projection thing to do, but they agreed because they wanted more visibility for the new campus. The School of the Arts could do that. We could make something so exciting that people would show up, from students to the neighborhood. And I'll say this last thing about it. We had to get everyone at that site to turn off their lights. All those apartment buildings at Columbia had to turn off their lights. When we first told the facilities people, you're going to have all these buildings to turn off their lights, they say, no way in hell, New Yorkers will never do it. And they did it. And then everyone was so proud of it. So we pulled everybody in, and at the end, we made beautiful photographs for everyone. We wrote inscriptions, we framed them, we gave them to all the facilities people, everyone who helped in the city. That's what this art school can do. It can make gifts.
So you mean the buildings around the campus turned off?
All the buildings around the new campus,
right,
on 125th Street. So it was all, and not only that, but they didn't know how to shut off the lights in the new building. Imagine the ecological nightmare of new buildings that they don't know how to shut the lights off. They didn't know how to shut off the lights. And finally they figured it out, and then when someone walked by, all the lights came on again. So they didn't, imagine that you create buildings, you don't know how to shut the lights. Anyway, it was fascinating, but everyone was involved and everyone bought into it, from students. And we had one initiative, which was no single-use plastic on Columbia campus ever again. And everyone signed that oath. And now when 45,000 people come for graduation, we have water stations, no more single-use plastic. And we did that, and the students did that. That was their initiative. Said, let's do an initiative the students can help make happen, and they made that happen. So it was a big success all around, but I don't see any other school at Columbia that could have pulled it off. Visually, creatively, it was wild in a way, and it was so unbelievable that we could do it.
So if you were to describe all of that up front to somebody, we're going to do this, and we're going to get there, someone would say impossible.
Impossible.
No way,
they said
right?
Impossible.
They said that. All right. So, which brings me to mind, you've written on several occasions extensively about the importance of having a utopian vision. You've also written that universities are utopian environments. Now, this is a word that I'm not very comfortable with. I don't know about others in this room.
I wouldn't get fixated on the word.
So please elaborate.
Yeah. I think that we live when we're in universities and environments like this, we live in amazing worlds because we can have conversations like this, because we feel safe in this room right now and we can talk about these things and we can project the future. There are very few places, if you look at what's going on in the world, where that kind of work can happen. And yet universities are also places where people are always disgruntled and sort of unhappy. I don't know, I don't want to get that. We're so privileged. I don't mean privilege in a bad way. We just have so much opportunity. And so I feel like it's the job of people in leadership to hold that idea that we have this unique environment. And in this unique environment, what do we want to do? We don't want to just perpetuate what's happened before. We want to think about what needs to happen now, what needs to happen for the future. I mean, art schools are particularly that way because you have people who are so creative and who are going to think of things you've never in your life imagined. You have art moving in directions. Your practice, Georgia, it's so contemporary in the sense that artists are they're looking at what is not happening and saying, what should we be doing that needs to happen, that we could pull it off as artists. That doesn't mean making sculptures, that doesn't mean making paintings, doesn't mean making music. It could be working with communities as you're doing in all kinds of different ways. But what's the variable that's unique is the creative part of how artists approach those problems.
So what is it like to pursue a goal that everybody tells you can't be done?
That's always the case. So it's after when I was at the Art Institute, there were open calls about 10, 15 a week. So I sent my first one and I got a rejection. And I thought, oh, that doesn't feel good. So I got into the habit of writing about 15 proposals a week. I thought, I have to get used to this so it doesn't affect me. I have a box of rejection letters. After a while, after a year and a half, impossible. It's like, okay, now let's talk. Now let's have this conversation again. And it can take about 100 calls, about 30 emails, finding people's relatives, cousins, whatever it takes. When we speak about creativity as if it can be taught, and I don't think it can, but it can be used if it's motivated from a real place, and then it can also be applied. So when you have the motivation and the reason for the application, then you will find a way to bypass the impossible and get your project done.
Let's move on to the World Economic Forum. Now, this is a place of high-powered executives and politicians.
Oh, yes.
How did you get yourself?
Okay, another crazy story, really. I mean, when I became a dean at Columbia, the president then, Lee Bollinger, used to take whoever was the new dean to the World Economic Forum, and he took me that year, and Nick Lemon, who's a journalist, writes for the New Yorker and New York Review Books and New York Times. And Nick knew a lot of people because he was a journalist, wasn't really excited to be there. I knew no one, and I didn't even know how to know anybody there. I mean, it was just like, it was Mars. I might as well have gone to Mars in the Alps. But I met a fantastic person. I met a person who then was the head of what it was called the Global Leadership Fellows. And that it was a group of people, they were sort of in a certain age group in their 20s and 30s that were being groomed by the forum to be leaders. And they were from all over the world and coming from all kinds of backgrounds. So Gilbert Probst, who became the head of a very big bank in Switzerland after he left the World Economic Forum. But Gilbert, I met Gilbert because he was also a dean. I don't know how I met him, but I met him. And he said to me, what you do? And I told him about the school. And I said, okay, how do you train leaders? Like, what do you do for leaders? Like, I said, do you have a way that you train leaders to be in the public arena? Like, do you help them to speak well? Do you help them to write well? Do you help them to find their voice as leaders? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, do you just bring in people who do that kind of thing for the corporate world? And he said, yes. I said, okay, why don't you, another crazy thing. I said, why don't you come to Columbia and we will do that, but we will have real theater teachers that train actors, real voice coaches that train actors, people that work with people on Broadway. We'll give you the real deal. So Gilbert said, okay. And they came for a week, and we had, but then I had to go back to Columbia and find people to do this. This is not my, I mean, I'm not a theater person. I had to find people, but I knew that we had a woman named Kristen Linkletter who has this Linkletter, and you could, if you Google her, you'll see Linkletter School of Voice or Training. She's died recently, but they're all over the world. And they train people to speak, to present. And so I said to Kristen at the time, you got to help me. I promised something. I have no idea how to make this happen. And she said, we can do this. So we did. And we also brought in Augusta Boal, Theater of the Oppressed training. But we didn't call it Theater of the Oppressed because that wouldn't really be good for the World Economic Forum. So we gave it a different name. You know, we sort of thinking, oh, who's our audience? And the first year I thought, we'll do this once. And it'll be, you know, and then we'll never do it again. We did it for 10 years. For 10 years, until they dissolved that program, they came, it was everyone's favorite week. They did all these exercises, rolling around the floor, you know, all these physical exercises. They did Theater of the Oppressed, Augusta Boal training, and they left and they said, this is transformative. Everything starting with just saying their name and standing up to say their name, to actually creating little scenarios. And then I brought in writing because I think that having an original voice is so important, and not just having a voice which you can learn as everyone speaks in the corporate world, the same voice as everyone, but your own voice, and then embodying yourself. How to acting teachers teach people how to live in their bodies, and we all live in our minds. So how do you get people in their bodies so that when they speak, people listen to them? So it's a huge success. And then, so we did that for 10 years. And then it was so good that the Obama Scholars, we have a program at Columbia, which is called the Obama Scholars, and they're from all over the world, and they're grassroots leaders, and they wanted us to do it for them. So we did it for them. Now the School of International and Public Affairs, we just did it for them. And Hillary Clinton now has a new institute on leadership and women and global issues at Columbia. And I've talked to the dean of SEPA, School of International Public Affairs, and they want us to do it for them. So it's become like this whole thing. But it was totally one of those ideas where you just say, this should happen. How can we make it happen? And you find the right person. So Gilbert was the right partner, because anything I suggested, he said, let's try it. We did so much because he was daring. He just didn't fit into any boxes. And he said, let's try it. And then also the other part of the World Economic Forum, my life, is bringing artists to the forum, and the radical idea that we all had, and including Paolo Antonelli, who was head of design at the Museum of Modern Art, and so many other people, Yo-Yo Ma, all these amazing people come and work on this, which is to put artists on panels around important issues, not just their own panels, but artists on panels about water, or artists on panels about rights of women or human rights or anything. Just put artists on those panels with everyone else and let artists talk from their point of view.
And how does the conversation change in those panels?
Because it becomes an unpredictable conversation. The minute you mix disciplines, and then the minute you mix people who are willing to go like that, like everybody's going like a river in one way, and then artists go that way. They say, whoa, okay, what's over there? And then everybody goes that way. So you have to have people who are willing to shake it up, but that's the subversive part. And artists aren't necessarily trying deliberately, it just comes naturally to them to be original in that way.
Okay, so let me go to another point. Now, if you're following McKinsey, there was recently an interview by Johnny Ive, the well-known designer who made Apple, the Apple that we know today, Apple, the computer company, right? And I recommend it to everybody. He emphasizes this focus on process. Now, in companies, most of the time, we're focused on the outcome. You know, bring the sales in, bring the revenue in, meet the target. And when we talk about process, most of the time, we talk about standardizing operating procedures, because we want to make sure that we do the same thing, the same way over and over again, and it's efficient. But I suspect that the way that artists look at process is different.
Let's ask Georgia.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, please, what were the words you used? Standardized?
SOPs. It's a very well-known three-letter acronym, Standard Operating Procedures.
Wow.
Yes.
No, this is not.
I don't know it either.
This is not what we do. No, because we learn from the process. Sometimes the outcome we might it might not be satisfying enough. We might not use it, but then we keep the process. We learn from the process, and then we'll apply it again, and then change perhaps parts of it or elements in it. Processes almost are training. Imagine that you're an athlete and you're preparing for a marathon. I have to go through my process, and it's a different Also, sometimes it becomes a methodology after many, many, many years of practicing. So it's different for every single artist, but it's essential.
But isn't it true that you'll be in the middle of something and it'll shift direction completely?
Absolutely.
Which would never happen if you preconceived the outcome, right?
Yes. I mean, we do have an idea of where we're going to go. But then an opportunity might rise in the middle of the process. And then, wow. Then if it has the wow factor, we're going with a wow factor. And then we're going back to the other idea that we had in the beginning. So that kind of flexibility, we work alone, so we have the freedom to change routes,
So what is the relation between what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to achieve versus, what you're trying to achieve and at the same time allowing the process to be open-ended?
You don't know where you'll meet with art. That meeting point, you don't know when it's going to happen. You think that by doing something through your method that you have developed, you arrive to art. But at some point halfway through, it will appear. Then you just grab it.
How does it feel like?
Beautiful.
It's not scary?
Oh, it is scary. Oh, Georgia, come on.
It's scary because
It's
then
scary when you
you're gonna
don't
have to
know
run.
where it's going to go,
Yeah,
right?
you're gonna have to run with it, but it stops being scary after a while. It's a high. It's
a high.
Huge high.
All right.
Yeah.
Can I say something about this? So after many years of writing philosophical books and essays, I wrote the most recent book that's published is a memoir. And I never intended to write that memoir. I intended to write a book about death after my mother died. I was going to write a book about death, a philosophical book. I had just spent 5 years on a project in Laos, and I was really fascinated by the rituals around death. They're so interesting and complicated. And I sat down to write that book, and that's not the book that I wrote. And the book I ended up writing was a very personal book, and that was terrifying. But it was the book that wanted to be written. I don't know how else to say it. And so I just went with it. And then I was terrified to put it in the world because it was so personal. I just felt like I was turning my inside out. And I just put it away for 2 years. I didn't even do anything with it.
So when you say that an artist trusts the process, you trust what? What is it that you place your trust on?
You trust that in your, and can we talk about the unconscious? Okay. So you trust that you already know where something is going. You're just not conscious of it yet. That your unconscious mind or your spirit, however you want to talk about it, already knows where it's going. You just don't know it yet. So the process is for you to come to understand what it is you're actually doing. Or you think you're doing one thing, and everyone in this room has had this experience. Like you go into a project or something thinking you understand the intention. And halfway through, you realize, oh no, that's not what I thought it was going to be at all. Not just the result, but the fact that you're even doing it. Like you think, oh, you think you know your motivation, but you don't actually know because we are so complicated as humans. We have so many different realities living in us at any given time. We are not aware of them all. If we were, we probably couldn't function truly.
Sounds like play.
Play. You just want to
Sounds
get.
like
You just
play.
want to get that word in.
I do, yes.
Okay. Well, play is the best part of it. Play is like you say, okay, I'm just going to. When you're a child, I always say that everyone thinks their children should do art. Everybody believes that. But then you're supposed to stop. And as I called it, prepubescent art. Like when you get to be an adolescent, you're supposed to stop and grow up now and do something meaningful. Like not all this play stuff that you were making, those paintings, which everyone loved and said was so great and put on their refrigerator. And all. That's over. Now you're supposed to be serious. And a lot of people get trapped in that and their life, and they end up in doing work actually they don't love, which is really tragic because it's hard to have a happy life if you don't like the work, if you have a choice. Some people don't have a choice. But if you have a choice, art making is what Marx called and Hannah Arendt called unalienated labor, because you can see yourself in the work. And most production, people who make this can't see themselves in it. But if you go to watch a piece that Georgia has done, or even the work she's doing now with community groups, everything about George is in that work. And she can see it because she met all those people. She brought those people together. She had the idea. She figured it out. And then the process took over from there. And she's joyful at the moment at which it actually happens. But many people live without work that's satisfying in that way. So if you have that opportunity to know what you actually want, you have to stay connected to those different parts of the self. And this is how art, the function of art in the world is it helps us reconnect to those parts in ourselves, whether it's because it moves us emotionally or because beauty opens up our heart or creates compassion, that we live more in the present. And play is about being in the present. When children are playing, they're not worrying about time. They're not worrying about anything. They're just in it. And people talk about artists being prophetic, but I always say that artists are just absolutely present. So they're in the moment. And in the moment, they're letting the next thing happen without trying to control it.
So that's part of the process.
And scary, because if you stop, you think, oh my God, if I stop in the middle of writing and think, is there ever going to be a book? Is anyone ever going to want to read this book? Am I ever going to get this book published? I won't write. So I have to trust that when I jump into it, it's going to somehow manifest itself. And the more you do like that in the world, the more you have a foundation, not quite as frightening. But my first book got 21 rejections right off the bat. So every day I would just go to bed. Every time I got a rejection, I would just go in the bed and put the cover over me. Okay, and then get up the next day and start over. But it's because the world won't always see what you're doing. That's the hard part for artists. They're often ahead of where the world is. They're seeing something the world's not ready to see yet. And so it's rejection, and it's very painful.
So now you're taking me somewhere else, but I just want to consolidate this a little bit, that there's this trust in the process, and there is this essence of playing the process, of trying things, being open to what might happen if I make that move or the other, right? But now you're saying that an artist sees things that other people don't see because he's present in the moment.
He or she.
He or she, yes.
Or they.
They are.
Everybody's present.
Yes, they're present in the moment. They are open to the experience. They slow down time, perhaps. Yes. Now, in business, what we do is we do market research. We do focus groups. We do data collection. We do big data collection.
How does that work for you?
Well, every.
No, I'm just teasing you.
I'm going to promote now my specialization. Every problem has an answer in data, right? So you throw the data in the machine, and the machine gives you the answer. So what is it different that you do?
We don't have those
You're
machines.
enjoying it.
We don't have machines. We don't throw our data into machines.
We do research.
Yeah.
We'll talk to people. We'll kind of feel in.
Let me quote you. Hold on, I've got a quotation. I'll find it. Where is it? I don't know where it is. The artist has the hand on the pulse of society. There's a quotation of that kind somewhere in my papers. Yeah. So how do you put your finger on the pulse of society?
You have to be present. You have to be in it. It's like I was saying to Georgia, I love when I come back to New York or Athens, just like you're on the street and you feel the pulse, you feel the energy, you watch what people are doing, you watch what they're. Artists are people who are living in that present. They're enjoying all of that information. They may not have this data collecting and everything else. And the other thing is, the most important thing probably is you're trying to actually figure out what's going to succeed with all that data.
Yes.
Artists, they don't know how to do that in a way. You can't measure it. You can just think, this is a really good idea that should happen in the world. This should happen. And even if 4 people come to this, or 2 people come to it, it should happen. And then once it happens, it has a life. So you have to believe, you have to take that risk that there's a reason why you are so drawn to it, that you care about it so much. There's a good reason. You have to trust yourself in a very deep way, because you're not going to get that data from the world to figure out what somebody might like in a painting, because by the time you get the data, the world has changed. Also, you can't make that painting. The world could tell you that, people like blue, they like red, they like these. You can make that painting and no one will want that painting. Or you could make something so outrageous and all of a sudden everyone wants it. How did that happen? Like, it's just, this is kind of a magic to it, for the failure and for the success. So
Sometimes you can put all this work in and then look at the result and go, wow, I'm glad I made it. Now let's go back to the drawing board. There's failure to it.
Which, again, the other word I want to put in the discussion is the word risk. In business, we want to mitigate, avoid, or harness for profit again. But risk is, from what you're saying, risk is what you feed in.
if there's no risk involved, then someone's already done it. How do you try something new without risk? I mean, how do you know people are going to like something? What were we laughing about? Uggs. Remember those shoes, those boots? Like, who would ever think anyone would want those boots? They're horrible looking boots. You know, and how did that become a hit, right? Was it some rock star wore them? In a concert, and then everybody wanted them. Who could have predicted that? You know, but somebody made those ugly things there was a purpose for them.
Apparently surfers used to wear them in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, yeah.
But you know, who could put that together?
Yeah, to give them work.
Who could put that together in fashion and decide this is what's going to become fashionable? Or in music, or in art. Like, people make things, but if someone's not willing to try it, it won't come into the world. It comes to people for a reason. The idea comes to people for a reason. And if they're lucky in their life, they get a chance to try it, whatever it may be, you know, and it could be the wrong direction, but 10 years later, it was the right direction.
10 years later, 21 rejections later.
Oh, yeah, 21 years rejections, yeah, that book. And then that book came out in 7 languages, you know, even in Greek. It was so wonderful. My students did. I was so thrilled. But I didn't know. It could be that no one would have ever published it. That could have happened, you know, and that would have been devastating. But what would I have done? I would have moved on to the next book. And you wrote to me in a note, you said, I wrote Surpassing the Spectacle 22 years ago, and we live in spectacle culture now. Yeah. But Guy Debord knew it 56 years ago, you said, which is true, when he wrote Society of the Spectacle.
Okay, let's explain this a little bit now.
So Guy Debord was one of the situationists in France, and he was very interested in what he saw 56 years ago, which was society becoming incredibly obsessed with the external and not with the complexity of the internal or the process of understanding. It's something we're living with now. You know, mega results in the world of computers and false knowledge and false information and people being satisfied with very superficial understanding of the world, you know. And I was interested in what we're not seeing because we're so delusional about what's right in front of us, which is the spectacle. And now we really know what spectacle culture is because we live it every day and we try constantly to overcome it. And one of the things art does is it complicates the world, which is the antithesis to me of what spectacle culture is. It makes the world more complex, which really we need, more problematized, deeper, more dimensional. Like, no situation today has a simple solution.
So the way I read your book, Surpassing the Spectacle, and the thing that came to mind first is the experience of TikTok. Now, simplifying it a little bit, TikTok is basically a sequence of 1-minute videos. And then you raise your eyes and it's been 3 hours past.
And you're gone.
Yes. And
you've just wasted 3 hours.
So this an idea goes back to the 50s. Today, we live in this kind of world of fragmented time, of a spectacle, of a 1-minute spectacle that is kind of randomized in front of your eyes and eats up your time via a device which is sold as a device that will save you time. You know, buying online, whatever it is you want to buy.
And we're all addicted to our phones, and we use them, and we need them. And we wouldn't know what to do without them. So you can't take it away now. The question is, what do we do going forward?
So that's what I'm seeking. I'm seeking what is the attitude of the artist that slows down time and brings you to the present moment.
Do you want to say to that? Do you want me to?
I'm thinking about it.
Okay. You know, if you begin a project, like I've just written another book, and once again, not knowing where that's going to go, not knowing if anyone's going to be interested in what I'm necessarily talking about, but compelled to do it. When I'm doing that, when I'm writing that book, I am the most focused I can be. It calms me. it deepens my wisdom, my understanding. You know, I mean, if you read my writing, you know, I study Buddhism. I'm very interested in deep consciousness, and I think it is the antidote to the spectacle culture. I think embodiment is also the antidote to the spectacle culture, and staying focused and present, because everything in the society now is pulling us away from focus. But the only way we really can achieve great things is to stay focused, whether it's on an issue, a problem, a relationship, whatever it is. How to be present is getting harder and harder and harder for people. But artists are people who have to stay present, because otherwise no one cares if they do what they do. It's not like people are going to come knock on the door and say, are you making a painting today? You know, no one cares. So you have to believe so deeply, and you have to, it's so meditative, the act of writing or the act of being involved in a project. And you all know this when you're working in what Csikszentmihalyi called flow. Remember that? So that notion of flow, when you're in the flow, you are so focused, you're joyful, because your whole attention, all your astral body and your mental body and your psychic body, they're all lined up, and you can produce something completely unique. So how do you help people to get to that state? And art is one of the ways you can do that. Well, art is a vehicle for focus in that way.
And this is the right moment to take questions from the audience in the room and online. And I would like to ask anyone, but I'm sure you have lots of ideas in mind, but I'd like to to give you the floor.
You answered the question about subversiveness. So I'm going to follow up on Nikos' question with another subversive question. So as the leader, as the dean of the school, I would expect that you would give us an insight. How would you handle people's subversiveness against your authority? Instead, you told us how you became a leader of a subversive cause of the art school towards the rest of, which was a wonderful answer. But there is a great deal of subversive behavior, of rebellious behavior within your world, right? You have artistic movements, you have, and I really want to ask about this part of an art school and the profession of the artist, which is about collaborative arts. Many of your answers go about individual art, sculptor, a painter. How about people doing theater? How about people in an orchestra? Because part of the freedom, I guess, they don't always have to choose what to do, how to do it. They're in a constant process of negotiation. Sometimes they feel they're these leadership authorities, the maestro, the opera director. So my question is, how do you experience that in an art school? And how do you really prepare people for careers that they have not only to be talented enough technically or to be in a kind of connection with themselves, but also to work very proactively with others to produce great opera, great play, a great piece of music, symphony?
It's a great question. Well, I'm not teaching, and I don't teach theater, but I have been managing a theater part. To School of the Arts in Columbia's theater, visual art, writing, and film. So of those, the most collaborative is theater and filmmaking. You can't do it alone, which is why during COVID, my life was a complete nightmare, because people couldn't work and they were so upset and so frustrated, and I understood it. But the faculty are really brilliant. Let's say in theater, we have amazing faculty. They bring in a cohort every year of new actors, let's say. Those actors have to become an ensemble. So that is a really difficult process, because they all think they're the best actor, and then now they're with everybody else who's the best actor, because they've all gotten into this very elite, difficult program to get into, and they have to work together. As you say, they don't necessarily get to choose the play they're going to do. They don't necessarily get to choose the director they're going to work with. They don't even get to choose their cohort, and they don't always get along. And we've had very rebellious students within those cohorts who take up everybody's time and energy, and basically they just don't succeed, because when you go out into the world as an actor, you can't do that. You can't subvert the entire production because of your individual will. So either they learn how to work collaboratively as part of the profession they've chosen, or they won't stay. They won't succeed in the school. In filmmaking, right from the day one, they're making films with groups of students, and people shift roles. So sometimes someone is the producer of the film, sometimes they're the director, sometimes they're the screenwriter, and that whole first year is about learning all of it and shifting roles within it. So they also have to learn how to work together. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always succeed. And some of those conflicts do end up in the office of the dean. And they can be really crazy things where someone is saying you're racist, or someone saying you're sexist, or someone, you know, it can be that kind of thing. And learning how to negotiate, they have to learn how to negotiate. And a lot of it gets mediated with me when I was in the role of the Dean of Students. So I think, is that what you're asking?
Ask, if you allow me, one follow-up question. You mentioned about the existence of several professional schools at Columbia. Say, for example, the medical school. An anesthesiologist becomes partially trained to know how to work with a surgeon on any given night without even knowing who the surgeon is. They know how to place the bodies, the distance to perform a surgery. So do you see an analogy in the way you train people, for example, filmmaking, a script writer, a lighting designer, all of these people to come together anywhere in the world with people who are completely unknown, but somehow they've been enculturated through being in the art school to know how to function together?
Yeah, because these are professional schools. And that's the part that people don't understand. When they say, oh, why do you need art school? You need to become a professional. Because if you're doing it on your own, that won't happen for you. You need to be, and the way that that's done is different in some ways. Some of that is not, it's not like when I got a PhD and I had to learn these bodies of knowledge. It's not so much the bodies of knowledge, it's transmission. And in a way, it's more like a Buddhist, you know, someone with a teacher, where the way of being is transmitted from one artist to another artist, or from one filmmaker to another filmmaker, where the faculty have to be professionals in that field, working every day themselves, or working whenever they can themselves, in order to teach students how to be professional in the world, because they're going to have to drop in to every other kind of situation. Here they might be working on a television series. There they might be making a film. They're shooting in Beirut. They're moving around the world. If they don't learn from school, from the model of the faculty, how to be that or how to do that, they're probably never going to get it. So actors the same. My research assistant right now is an actor, and he wrote to me the other day and he emailed me, he said, I'm sorry I didn't get to this thing you wanted me to do because I had to do the lighting board the whole weekend last weekend for a production. So he's learning every aspect of theater, so that when he is making theater or part of theater, he understands it all. He actually wants to be a playwright, but he's studying acting first. I said, how come you're doing acting? You're absolutely a playwright. I could just tell by the way you speak, you're a playwright. He said, because I want to know what it is to be an actor, so when I'm directing and I'm writing plays, I will be good at that. So the professional environment is so rigorous, they work so hard. It's 24/7 job to be a student in theater or filmmaking. It's just so intense. The writers are much more on their own, but even they have to be in workshops where they learn how to take criticism, and their faculty are people who help them get out into the world and are preparing them for that next step. So that's the professional part of it, but you're absolutely right, collaboration's huge. And you have to take temperaments that have not been trained to be collaborative, and they have to learn to be collaborative, you know, and it isn't always easy for people, and some people don't make it. It's a great question, though.
I have a very tangential question to ask. In this area right now, where we're talking about AI, generative AI, and the whole world is going behind big data, like you mentioned, I just want to know from your lens, as an artist lens, how do you see that world? And how does it impact the life and world of artists?
I mean, it's so evolving, it's hard to even say, but I think, and Georgia might want to say something to this, artists have always embraced whatever new technologies exist, you know, and I've written about, you know, in the old days when Apple was just getting going and they wanted people to try out computers, they used to give us in Chicago, they would give us the newest version of something to try, and made it very easy for us to give everyone a laptop. But none of this exists anymore. They don't need us anymore. But in those early days, they wanted to see what would artists do with the technology? How far would they push it? I was telling Georgia that in the early days of Xerox, students would lay on them and photograph naked parts of their body, then collage them. Like, who would have, you know, expected that, right? But they were interested in this. I think the same thing's happening now. There have been several big, and the World Economic Forum last year had enormous AI piece, generated piece by a Turkish artist, which then went to MoMA. a similar piece where he took all this data of everything that every painting that had ever been shown in MoMA, and by the end of it, it just looked like the wall was vomiting itself up, truly. But it doesn't mean, it looked like a big lava lamp. I don't know if you were too young maybe to know what a lava lamp is, but it's like this, and it was so spectacular, and everybody's kind of like, but it was horrific. But it could be that over time, these things will be more interesting, but also artists will use it. They'll use it. The writers will use it. They'll have, they'll write a novel with AI, and it'll chat box GPT will be the character, and they'll be talking back, and they'll use it. Where it goes beyond that, it's very hard to predict. But everyone's so fearful, but artists are not fearful of technology. They're always like, whoa, okay, let's see what this will do. And because because artists have always had things they want to make happen, they don't know how to, they see it in their mind, but they don't have the technology to make it happen. Computers changed everything. I mean, people make their films on their computers, on their phone. They edit it. We used to have big editing suites and all kinds of technology. All of that's gone now. It's all on the laptop. So, the more streamlined, the more efficient, the cheaper it gets, better and better for artists. How AI will evolve, I can't say more because I don't know more. I think we're just gonna have to watch.
Yes, do,
I
please.
think it dilutes the aesthetics tremendously, and it's stripped of any poetics that art has. So it's a gimmick and a very good help, an assistant. Oh, I have this vision of something. I can command, any system to produce something. I look at it, I'm like, wow. And I'll have to move on. Perhaps it's not satisfying enough. What can I use it? It's definitely, we speak about AI art, generated art. It's not art yet. One day it might become art. Right now, it's just a game that we just push into its breaking point. So it's very helpful for me if I want to write something. I can just rewrite this as a 5-year-old. Oh, I love that. So what can it do not only to amuse me and entertain me, but to kind of test different perspectives, different projects, different views that I could have done on my own. But it's not close to art at all.
Well, it like even watching this artist who was at the World Economic Forum and then at MoMA, I've thought if he teamed up with his team, he has a huge team, if that technology teamed up with a really good artist, that could be interesting. But just because he can manage the team of technology doesn't make him a good artist. I think that's what George is saying. He has the technology, but if he brought in a really good artist, something interesting might happen. And that's where it could get interesting. But I was going to say on the other side of it, there's never been a time where the original personal voice, I think, has been more important than now. And developing that voice has been more important than right now. So I think that's where writing and the visual art, where people get to express a very unique point of view, I think is going to become more and more precious, and maybe art schools become more and more precious. And I think it's so amazing that you're doing so much with the arts at this school. It's very impressive. I didn't know that, and it's really great to hear that, because artists really, really welcome that kind of collaboration across schools. That's where artists really can shine. And I think, honestly, the world is such a mess that if we don't bring all of our intelligences together, we're going to fail here. And that's true of climate, true of everything right now, that we need all of us together. We can't, these silos of discipline, it doesn't even make sense anymore. And young people don't even think about the world that way anymore. They don't. We're still stuck with structures that are 19th century, and yet we keep perpetuating them. And it's not that people don't need deep knowledge. They need deep knowledge, but they also need this kind of knowledge. So we have to really restructure how we're teaching in every way, I think, and institutions. And that's the subversive part to some extent.
Can I add something to what you're saying? I think also we have some productions and examples of really impressive and seductive works of art, attempts, but still we're not quite there yet. But we do have examples that are quite bright, that they're really trying to break that boundary between just AI-generated work, and artwork.
And artists, for example, are super involved in all issues around climate right now, and they're working with scientists. And I'm doing a series next year called "Where Ideas Come From" with neuroscience. And artists are we're everywhere we can where we have capacity, like you're doing here, bringing in art, talking about art. We're doing the same with the art school, moving it out of its own discipline, having these conversations, you know, shaking up the university a little bit.
It seems to me that in the performing acts particularly, the visually ephemeral is becoming the more pronounced form, devoid of emotional intelligence. Do you have a feeling that this is passing over to the way that the business world is dealing with particular issue of art?
Do you mean when you say, when you're talking about the ephemeral, what are you thinking?
Something that would impress something very short term, but will disappear in a very immediate future.
You mean in the art?
In the performing acts, in the performing arts, theater and dance, for example, or film, but particularly in theater.
Do you think it's happening in business? You probably know more than I do about the business world.
I have that impression, yes, indeed.
And what would be the antidote to that?
I don't know. I'm not an artist and I can answer that. But we've seen it here, for example, in the performance of ancient drama, where all is picture, impression.
Oh, I see what you're talking about.
And you lose the content.
I see. So when I think about that, I think then there have to be artists, like theater artists, who go back to the original and recreate that magic that was so powerful in those original plays, and takes the risk that a new generation will embrace that, because those plays talk to the humanness of people so profoundly, so deeply. And the whole notion of catharsis, which we so much need right now, to act out the deepest desires, both good and bad, of humans. So, you know, there just needs to be a movement on the other side. Someone will do it. Someone will come and go back, you know, we'll go back to the real ancient, as you do in Greece already, but not just in Greece, because those plays are produced everywhere around the world. You know? But I understand what you're saying.
Can I just come back to this question of Stelios? Did you have in mind recent performances in the summer, last summer in Greece, where some performances of classical drama have been heavily criticized in the Greek press for being, my words, too experimental? Is that what you had in mind? So I think, if I understand Stelios correctly, the criticism, some particularly foreign, I think, directors who staged classical drama in Greece, some people thought that they were too experimental, far removed from the original. What's the point in doing such experimental art which nobody can understand? So that there's a certain criticism that comes, I call it conservative criticism personally, but one does not have to accept it. But there's some validity, prima facie, there's some validity in this. But for an artist, from an artist's point of view, I guess, it would be different.
I think it depends on how well it's done. I mean, you know, just because something's done differently or in a new form, it doesn't mean it's better. But if you get a really interesting director who wants to stage Antigone in a completely unique way, it could be fabulous. But I think if maybe perhaps these things end up being a splash, but there's not really a depth of understanding, or because all art, everyone in art making in all forms steals from everybody else all the time, because they're building on the traditions of what's been created before. And there is the staging of things, which is very classical, but then there's the new adaptations. And some of those can be brilliant and some of those can be terrible. And I've walked out of things like that, which are terrible. So just that it's new doesn't make it great. But if you get a great director trying something really innovative, it could be super interesting and could bring back a play that no one has talked about in a very long time, or could be very timely. So I think it just depends on how well it's done, truthfully.
And it will show itself over time? Are you implying?
It shows itself when you're sitting in the audience and you don't want to be there. I mean, nothing is more immediate than theater if it's not working. You just want to go and you can't, you know, you're stuck. I mean, theater can be painful when it's not well done, but also we're all unique, like things that other people will love, we might not love. That's so true in film as well.
You talked about the Impressionists having had such a reception back at the time, right? But that's painting, it's not theater.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing, is that, you know, Impressionism, which is now on every teacup at MoMA, you know, you buy the cup and you have the Monet, was considered so radical that they didn't let pregnant women go see those paintings for fear that they would abort. So now, you know, X amount of years later, we have visually evolved as a species so that we don't see anything radical anymore in that, because we've seen so much more that's radical. And we just saw the most beautiful Cyprus Van Gogh show, oh my God, at the Met. And everyone was just, the paintings were so beautiful. Young people, old people, everybody loved it. It was spectacular to see those paintings again now, not because they were radical or not radical, but because it was so beautiful. And right now that just felt so healing and wonderful to people to see such mastery of form and the ability to really look at those paintings and see how he's doing them too. Anyway, but art has to keep evolving. You can't make the same paintings you could make at a certain time because the meaning has changed, the form has changed, but it doesn't mean we still can't learn from that original form. I think all of that has to exist simultaneously. You don't have to make a choice. But there are some things that are just not done well. That happens all the time too. And you don't have to love everything for, you know.
Okay. I will ask a politically subversive question. So I want to go back to the question that Stellos asked. In my experience, looking at the business sides of the arts, one of the reasons why spectacles become visually striking is to attract people who are not very familiar with that form of art. Because you have an audience who's very eclectic and knows very well the stuff, you don't need to give them visual fireworks to attack them. If you want to bring people who perhaps have never experienced that before, you know, the new generation, perhaps they don't have the patience to read the books. So sometimes it becomes, I say this a lot in the opera, you try to make it visually very impressive so people somehow can understand, especially the younger generation. So I would like to ask your view about this idea of being eclectic. I don't want to say the word elitist, because it will sound bad, but being eclectic versus being extremely egalitarian and very commercial in terms of your audience, because that plays a role how you make it easy for people to understand, or to what extent you want your audience to really work hard to see all the work that the artist has done. How do you feel about it?
Well, there's so many parts to that question. I mean, so, you know, that I don't know if they've been doing these projection things like Van Gogh's room, and the things that people go to that move from the painting to projections, right? And it costs a lot of money to go to it. So I don't go to those things because honestly, they just seem silly to me. But if it makes someone want to go look at the paintings after, that's great. But I think that these things, there's good and danger. The danger I'll start with is that we're so overstimulated that when we're not overstimulated, we think something's boring. And we don't stay with it long enough to see if there's something really meaningful there that could actually interest and affect us. So that's the dangerous part. So you project everything, you make everything dynamic, you put music to everything, and you shorten everything and you make it wow. And then that's what people get used to, and it's not that they're bored. So that's a problem because our attention span has gotten less and less and less and less. That's not a good thing. I truly don't believe that's a good thing because life is complicated and you have to take time with it. But on the other hand, you have a good point that there are people for whom a new, you know, opera, I mean, God knows the Met spends a fortune in New York or the Lyric in Chicago to do these elaborate, amazing sets to keep people coming because it's so expensive to put on an opera and they're always in the red, and a new generation may not want to do that. So I think all those things are okay, but I think there are times when things go so far that they move from being art to being entertainment. And that's a distinction that we could talk about, like what makes something entertainment and what makes something art. And sometimes those things collide and they could be the same thing, but and sometimes art is entertaining, but often what we mean by that is a flattening out of complexity so that you don't actually have to think. And you can just sit back and let it happen to you. You don't have to participate in it. I would say when you're forced to participate in some way, even if it's just at an emotional level, then it's art. And when you absolutely don't have to be there at all present, you could be on your phone watching the whole thing at the same time when we have entertainment. So, these are constantly renegotiated terrains. There's no one answer to that question. They're just being renegotiated all the time.
It's a fascinating discussion. I think we could carry on for a long time, but thank you very much, Georgia and Carol.
Thank you both.
And thank you all for attending. And hopefully, I'm certain that everybody has taken at least a couple of messages in your hearts out of this fascinating discussion. My takeaway is that when the robots take over, the artists are going to subvert them. So, thank you all.